It's the afternoon of June 23rd, 1942, and you are a mechanic at a sleepy little Royal Air Force base called Pembrey on the coast of Wales. This is not a frontline posting, it's a training field, the kind of quiet place they send you to learn the ropes, far from the actual war. So when a single fighter plane comes in low over the field that afternoon, lines up with the runway, and lands, smooth, confident, textbook, nobody panics. And then the pilot does something strange. Just for fun, he pulls the plane up and rolls it, a little victory celebration over the airfield, showing off before settling in to land. And as the plane taxis toward you and the engine winds down, you start to notice things. The shape is wrong. The cockpit sits wrong. And then you see them. Black crosses on the wings, a swastika on the tail. You are standing on British soil in the middle of the Second World War, staring at a German fighter that has just casually parked itself on your runway, and the pilot inside is smiling and relaxed, because he is absolutely certain he has just landed in France. Here's the part that turns this from a funny story into one of the most important accidents of the entire war. That plane was not just any German fighter. It was, at that exact moment, the single most wanted aircraft in the entire British war effort. The one machine the Royal Air Force was willing to risk men's lives to get their hands on, and a confused enemy pilot had just delivered it to them, intact, undamaged, gift-wrapped, for free. To understand how insane that is, you have to rewind about 10 months, to the day the RAF met a monster. It's late summer, 1941. By this point in the war, the British have earned a quiet confidence in the air. They have the Spitfire, fast, beautiful, deadly, the plane that helped win the Battle of Britain and saved the country. For a while, the Spitfire is the best thing in the sky over Western Europe, and everyone on the British side knows it. And then, one day over the Channel, that confidence runs into something new. German pilots start showing up in an aircraft nobody has seen before, and the results are immediate and ugly. RAF formations are getting torn apart by a fighter that does everything just a little bit better. It was the Focke-Wulf 190, and the Germans gave it a nickname that tells you everything you need to know. They called it the Würger, the butcher bird. It earned the name. The FW-190 was faster than the Spitfire in level flight. It rolled quicker, it dived harder, it climbed better, and it carried heavier guns. The Spitfire Mk V, the best fighter Britain had flying at the time, was suddenly, in almost every measurable way, outclassed. Pilots described being bounced by these things and having no answer for them at all. And this wasn't a statistic on a chart. It was young men climbing into their Spitfires, crossing the Channel on missions over occupied France, and simply not coming home. The RAF was bleeding, and for the first time in a long time, they were losing the technological race in the sky. Worse than that, they didn't even fully understand why. They could see the butcher bird was better. They just couldn't get close enough for long enough to figure out exactly how, because every time they met one, they were too busy trying to survive it. There was only one real solution. They needed to get their hands on one. A whole one. Intact, on the ground, where their engineers and test pilots could take it apart, fly it themselves, and find its weaknesses. The problem is, the enemy does not exactly leave their newest, most secret fighter lying around for you to borrow. Every FW-190 was on a German-controlled airfield, in German-controlled France, behind layers of German defences. So the British came up with a plan to get one anyway, and the plan was, to put it kindly, absolutely unhinged. It was called Operation Airthief. The idea was almost cartoonishly bold. A small team would slip across the Channel by boat, under cover of darkness, and sneak onto a Luftwaffe airfield in occupied France. With them would be a British test pilot, whose job was not to fight. It was to find a parked FW-190, climb in, figure out the controls of an enemy plane he'd never flown, start it up, and take off, alone, flying a stolen German fighter back across the Channel before anyone could shoot him down. If the anti-aircraft guns didn't get him, there was a very real chance his own side would, mistaking him for a genuine enemy raider. It was the kind of mission where you write your letters home before you leave. A celebrated test pilot named Geoffrey Quill was attached to it. Men were, very seriously, preparing to die for the chance to steal one airplane. And then, before they ever had to launch it, the universe flipped a coin. Go back to that afternoon, June 23rd, 1942. A group of FW-190s had been tangling with Spitfires over the south coast of England. It was a confused, swirling dogfight, the kind where the sky is full of planes and adrenaline and nobody has a clear picture of anything. And in the middle of it, one German pilot got himself turned around. His name was Armin Faber. He was 26 years old. He was rattled, he was low on fuel, and he had lost track of exactly where he was. So he did what every pilot is trained to do. He pointed himself toward home, south across the water, toward France. Except southern Britain has a cruel little trap built into its geography. There are two channels of water down there. There's the English Channel, which really does lead south to France, and there's the Bristol Channel, further west, which leads north, deeper into Wales. To a disoriented pilot, in the wrong place, with the coastline blurring beneath him, the two can look heartbreakingly similar. Faber crossed the water, absolutely convinced he was flying south to safety. He was, in fact, flying north, further into enemy territory with every second. When he finally saw an airfield below him, he must have felt pure relief. Home, friendly ground. He came in and he was so happy, so confident, that he treated the people below to that little victory roll before touching down. He landed his pristine FW-190, the most wanted plane in Britain, gently and perfectly, on a Royal Air Force runway in Wales. The men on the ground couldn't quite believe it either. There was no plan for this. So a duty pilot grabbed the only weapon within reach, a flare gun, because remember, this was a sleepy training base, sprinted out, climbed onto the wing of the German fighter, and pointed it at the pilot. Faber looked around at the unfamiliar uniforms, the wrong markings, the wrong everything, and the truth landed on him all at once. He hadn't escaped. He had handed himself and his secret weapon directly to the enemy. He was reportedly so devastated by what he'd done that he tried to take his own life on the spot. But the damage, for Germany, was already done. The plane was the real prisoner. Within days it was shipped off, repainted in British colours, and handed to the test pilots who had, just weeks earlier, been preparing to die to obtain exactly this. They flew it. They pushed it. They pulled it apart bolt by bolt, and they found what they'd been desperate to know: the butcher bird's secrets, its quirks, the places where its performance fell away, including how it weakened at very high altitude. All of that knowledge fed straight into Britain's answer, the Spitfire Mk IX, a new version built specifically to claw back everything the FW-190 had taken. And it worked. The gap closed. The skies that had become a death trap for RAF pilots swung back toward balance and then toward British control. That hard-won air superiority over Western Europe is the same air superiority that, 2 years later, made the D-Day landings possible. As for Operation Airthief, the suicidal raid, the letters home, the men ready to die, it was quietly cancelled. They no longer needed it. A confused German pilot had completed their impossible mission for them, and he'd done it without anyone having to fire a shot. And here's the thing that should sit with you. Heads, Faber notices his mistake, corrects course and flies home to France, and Britain is left running its desperate, deadly raid, with no guarantee it ever works. Tails, he keeps flying north, lands in Wales, and gifts his enemy the breakthrough they needed. He flew north. Now, a historian will rightly tell you the war did not turn on this one man alone. The deep forces were enormous. The industries, the strategies, the millions of people. All true. But deep forces don't schedule themselves. They wait for a spark, a small random human moment to set them off. And on that afternoon, the spark was one tired, frightened pilot, mistaking one channel of water for another. The country you live in, the borders on your map, the language in your mouth, all of it sits on top of 1,000 quiet accidents exactly like this one, moments that could so easily have gone the other way and just didn't. History was never a straight line drawn by destiny. It's a coin, spinning in the air, again and again and again, and we are all still living in the way it happened to land. And now you know.